Content warning. This episode discusses the murder and sexual assault of 2 children. Listener discretion is strongly advised. In 1986, 11-year-old Lindsay Wade was growing up in Tacoma, Washington, in the kind of household where the local news played most evenings, and murder wasn't usually a word that came up at the dinner table. That spring, it did. A 12-year-old girl, taken from a park in broad daylight while her younger sisters weren't looking. Found dead the same night, not far from where she'd vanished. 5 months later, it happened again. A 13-year-old girl, riding her bike alone through a different park a few miles away. Gone for the afternoon. Then gone for weeks. Found eventually in the underbrush not far from a trail she rode almost every day. 2 girls, 2 parks, 5 months apart. A city that had never had to think about this kind of thing suddenly couldn't think about anything else. Lindsay Wade grew up watching that fear settle over her hometown and grew up watching it never fully resolve. Because despite thousands of investigative hours, despite a task force, despite a community that handed over every tip and every rumor it had, both cases went cold, unsolved. No arrest. No answers. She grew up. She became a police officer. And then, in a turn of events that reads almost too neatly for a true story, she became the lead detective assigned to reopen the 2 cold cases that had shaped her entire childhood. It would take her the better part of a decade and a piece of DNA technology that didn't even exist when these girls were murdered to find out that the 2 cases she'd spent her whole career believing were connected were, in one crucial way, not connected at all. 2 different men. 2 entirely separate crimes. Committed within 5 months of each other, in the same small stretch of one American city, apparently without either killer ever knowing about the other. This is the story of Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian. Music swells, then fades. Part 1. Michella Welch was 12 years old in the spring of 1986. She lived in North Tacoma with her mother, Barbara, and her 2 younger sisters. Her parents had separated some years earlier, and Barbara had worked hard on her own to build a stable home for her 3 girls, buying a house, finding steady work, enrolling the girls in piano lessons. By the accounts of people who knew her, Michella was a spirited kid, a little headstrong, fiercely protective of her younger sisters, the kind of preteen who was starting to test the edges of her independence in exactly the ordinary ways 12-year-olds do. Wednesday, March the 26th, 1986, fell during her school's spring break. It was a bright, sunny day, and Michella decided to take her 2 younger sisters to Puget Park, a green, tree-lined stretch of parkland not far from their North Proctor Street home. They arrived around 10 in the morning. It didn't take long for the girls to realize they'd left their packed lunches at home. Around 11, Michella hopped on her bike and rode back to the house to grab the food, leaving her sisters to play at the park. While she was gone, her sisters wandered off to a nearby business to use the restroom. When they made their way back to the park a short while later, they found something odd. Michella's bike chained up beside theirs. Their lunches sitting on the picnic table exactly where she would have left them. But no Michella. They called her name. No answer. They went looking through the gulch that ran along one edge of the park, the kind of overgrown, semi-wild terrain that, in hindsight, is exactly the sort of place a predator would use to their advantage. Still nothing. Eventually, worried, they went and found their babysitter, who called the police. What investigators would later piece together from witnesses is genuinely chilling in how visible it all was, in broad daylight, in a public park. A 13-year-old boy, a classmate of Michella's, told police he'd seen an unfamiliar man loitering under a nearby bridge earlier that day, watching the girls, ducking away, coming back to watch some more. a school employee driving past the park in the early afternoon reported seeing Michella herself, alive, talking to a man who appeared to be gesturing down toward the gulch, the exact area where her body would later be found. Whoever that man was, and whether he was the same person the classmate had described earlier that day, has never been definitively established. What is certain is that sometime in that window, sometime after roughly 1:30 in the afternoon, Michella Welch was taken into that gulch, and she never came back out of it. Police searched through the afternoon and into the evening. At around 11:30 that night, a tracking dog found her. Her body was in the gulch, near a crude makeshift fire pit. She had been beaten. She had been sexually assaulted. Her throat had been cut. Her mother, Barbara, would later describe the moment police told her they'd found her daughter's body in language that has stayed with anyone who's heard it. That hearing the words, "we found her," isn't actually the relief a parent hopes for in that moment. It's the opposite. It's confirmation of the worst thing you could possibly be told. Part 2. A city on edge, the murder of a 12-year-old girl taken from a public park in the middle of a weekday, sent a wave of fear through Tacoma that's hard to overstate. This wasn't a crime that happened somewhere else, to someone else's family. It happened in a park many local families used regularly, in the kind of quiet, tree-lined neighborhood residents had always assumed was safe. Police worked the case hard. They had witness descriptions: a possibly Hispanic man in his mid-20s to mid-30s, medium build, dark hair, a possible mustache. And, separately, a younger white man in his mid-20s in a distinctive jean jacket, seen loitering under the bridge. Neither description ever led to a confirmed suspect. Detectives pursued dozens of leads, including a convicted child killer named David Fisher, who had murdered another young Tacoma girl years earlier, and had a documented history that made him a natural early suspect, but nothing tied him conclusively to Michella's murder either. Then, 5 months later, on the evening of Monday, August the 4th, 1986, another Tacoma family's world fell apart in almost exactly the same way. Part 3. Jennifer Bastian, known to friends and family as Jenni, was 13 years old, and by every account, she was a genuinely joyful kid, energetic, into gymnastics and swimming, the sort of teenager who filled a room. That summer, she'd been practicing hard on a new bike, a 15-speed she was determined to master before an upcoming IMCA cycling trip. On the afternoon of August 4th, Jenni asked her father if she could go for a ride. None of her usual friends were free that day, so she headed out alone, leaving a note behind letting her dad know she'd be back by 6:30 that evening. She rode toward Point Defiance Park, a large, heavily wooded park along the water in North Tacoma, not far, geographically, from where Michella had been taken 5 months earlier, though it was a different park entirely. Several people reported seeing Jenni in the park that afternoon, riding her bike, as late as around 6 o'clock, right around the time she'd promised her father she'd be heading home. She never came home. Her family reported her missing that same evening, and hundreds of people, police, volunteers, neighbors who'd lived through the fear of Michella's murder just months earlier, and had no intention of sitting this one out, joined the search through Point Defiance Park's dense trails and wooded ravines. It took over 3 weeks. On August the 28th, 1986, searchers finally found Jennifer Bastian's remains, hidden in the underbrush not far from a trail, close to where her bicycle was later recovered. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. For a city that had only just begun to catch its breath after Michella's murder, the discovery of a second dead 12 or 13-year-old girl, taken from a Tacoma park under almost identical circumstances, landed like confirmation of everyone's worst fear: that there was a predator moving through the city's public spaces, specifically targeting young girls, and that police had failed to stop him before he struck again. Part 4. One Killer or Two. Given the similarities between the two cases, the age of the victims, the use of city parks, the method of abduction, the sexual assault, investigators in 1986 formed the reasonable, if devastating, assumption that they were looking for one man responsible for both crimes. A 6-person task force was assembled. Over the following months, it logged more than 10,000 investigative hours. Thousands of tips came in from the public, Tacoma residents desperate to help, desperate for the fear gripping their city to end. None of it led anywhere. Forensic evidence recovered from Michella's case, semen collected during her autopsy, was eventually developed into a male DNA profile once the technology existed to do so. But when it was run against the National Felon Database, it produced no match. Whoever this man was, he had never been convicted of the kind of crime that would have put his DNA on file. Both cases went cold. Genuinely, agonizingly cold. The kind of cold where the original detectives eventually retire, where the files get boxed up and archived, and where two families are left to somehow keep living without ever being told who took their daughters or why. That's more or less where things stood for close to 3 decades. In 2011, the Tacoma Police Department set up a dedicated cold case unit. And a young detective who'd grown up in the shadow of these 2 unsolved murders, old enough to remember the fear, too young in 1986 to understand it fully, made detective, joined that unit in 2013 and inherited both files, Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian. Her name was Lindsay Wade. Part 5. The shocker. Wade approached both cases with the assumption almost everyone who'd worked them for 30 years had shared, that they were connected, that one man was responsible for both girls' deaths. It's worth sitting with how deeply embedded that assumption had become. It shaped how the original task force allocated resources, how leads were prioritized, how families in 1986 were told to think about what had happened to their daughters. One of Wade's early moves was to revisit the physical evidence with fresh eyes and modern forensic capability. Investigators had always assumed that whatever clothing Jenni Bastian had been wearing at the time of her assault had likely been removed before the attack, meaning her swimsuit, recovered near her body, had never been prioritized for DNA testing. In 2013, Wade had it tested anyway. It came back with a male DNA profile. On its own, that might simply have confirmed what everyone already believed. Instead, when that profile was compared against the DNA profile developed years earlier from Michella's case, the two did not match. Wade would later describe this discovery in blunt terms: a shocker. Genuinely one of those investigative moments that upends everything you thought you understood about a case. For nearly 30 years, an entire city, an entire police department, and 2 grieving families had operated on the belief that a single predator had murdered both girls. The DNA evidence said, unambiguously, that this had never been true. 2 different men had killed 2 different children within 5 months of each other in the same small corner of one American city, and, as far as investigators could tell, entirely independently of one another. It meant Wade wasn't hunting one killer. She was hunting 2. Part 6. Building the faces with 2 distinct DNA profiles now in hand, and neither one matching anything in the National Criminal Database. Wade needed a new approach entirely. Traditional DNA matching, the kind used across most of American law enforcement at the time, only works if your suspect's DNA is already on file somewhere. Neither of these men had a record that put them there. In 2015, Wade brought in Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, a forensic genealogist, to see what could be extracted from the Y chromosome data in each profile, information that, while it can't identify a specific individual, can narrow down a paternal surname line. That analysis returned a handful of possible surnames connected to Jenni's case, including one name that would turn out to be extraordinarily significant: Washburn. Around the same time, the cold case team also engaged Paraben Nano Labs, a company that had begun offering snapshot DNA phenotyping, a technique that predicts likely physical characteristics, skin tone, eye color, hair color, general ancestry directly from a DNA sample, effectively generating a computer-rendered composite face of a suspect who had never been photographed, arrested, or identified in any other way. In May 2016, Paraben delivered phenotype reports for both killers, and the department released the resulting sketches to the public, hoping someone would recognize a face built entirely out of genetic code. Nobody called in the tip that cracked the case. Not yet. Wade went back to a list she'd built years earlier, roughly 2,300 men who had some connection to either investigation, whether as a witness, a person of interest, or simply someone flagged during the original 1986 canvass. She narrowed it down to a smaller group of higher probability names. And when she cross-referenced that list against the surname results the genealogist had provided, one name jumped out immediately because Wade already recognized it from the files. Robert Washburn. Back in May 1986, mere weeks before Jenni Bastian was murdered, a man named Robert Washburn had called Tacoma police with a tip about Michella's case, reporting that he'd seen a jogger in Point Defiance Park who matched the description of a possible suspect. When investigators later interviewed him in December 1986, after Jenni's murder, he told them he jogged in that same park almost daily and mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd noticed a foul smell near the trail where Jenni's body would eventually be discovered. At the time, none of that made him a suspect. He had no criminal record. He'd voluntarily come forward with information. If anything, he read, in 1986, like a helpful bystander. Wade recalled the moment she connected the name from the genealogist's list to the file sitting in her own cold case archive. "I knew exactly who it was," she later said, "but I could just not believe it." Part 7. 2 arrests. Investigators tracked Washburn down in Eureka, Illinois, where he'd relocated years earlier. In March 2017, they approached him and asked for a voluntary DNA sample. Remarkably, he agreed to give one. It took time to process. On the 8th of May, 2018, 3 decades and 9 months after Jenni Bastian's murder, the results came back. It was a match. Robert Washburn, now 60 years old, was arrested at his Illinois home and extradited to Washington. He was formally charged with first-degree murder in Jennifer Bastian's death on the 24th of May, 2018. Investigators would later note something quietly devastating in his own history connected to the case. At the time of the murder, Washburn had been living just 9 blocks from Jenni's family home. He initially pleaded not guilty. Meanwhile, the second investigation into Michella's case was closing in on its own answer on an entirely separate timeline. In 2018, Paraben's genetic genealogy techniques, by this point considerably more advanced than they'd been just 2 years earlier, were applied again to the DNA profile from Michella's case. This time, the analysis pointed toward a family, 2 brothers, both of whom had lived in the Tacoma area in 1986. Detectives began quietly watching one of the brothers, a man named Gary Hartman. By 2018, a 66-year-old psychiatric nurse working at Western State Hospital, with no criminal record whatsoever, nothing in his adult life to suggest he'd ever been capable of the crime investigators were now looking at him for. In June 2018, detectives followed Hartman to breakfast with a co-worker at a nearby restaurant, and after he left, they collected a napkin he discarded at the table. The DNA on that napkin matched the DNA recovered from Michella Welch's body in 1986. Gary Hartman was arrested on the 20th of June, 2018, just over a month after Washburn's arrest for Jenni's murder. 2 days later, he was formally charged with first-degree murder and first-degree rape. Tacoma had waited 32 years for an arrest in either case. It got both within roughly 6 weeks of each other. Part 8. Robert Washburn's confession. Robert Washburn's case moved first through the courts. Facing overwhelming DNA evidence, he ultimately changed his plea. On the 25th of January, 2019, he pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Jennifer Bastian. He offered no live testimony and answered the judge's procedural questions with little more than simple yes or no responses. Instead, his account of what happened was read into the record from a written statement. In it, Washburn admitted that he had grabbed Jenni by the arm while she rode her bike through Point Defiance Park, dragged her into the woods, and strangled her. "I am deeply sorry for the death of Jennifer," the statement read. "I recognize there is little that my words can do to diminish the tremendous sense of pain and loss that this crime caused to many people." Jenni's mother, Patty Bastian, addressed the courtroom directly. "For us, normalcy disappeared on org. For the day you decided, Washburn, would be a good day to savagely murder our 13-year-old girl," she said. She would later tell reporters that Washburn's apology felt, to her, entirely insufficient against more than 3 decades of unanswered grief. 32 birthdays, 32 Christmases, 32 years of not knowing. Washburn was sentenced to 26.5 years in prison, at the upper end of the applicable sentencing range, with a requirement that he serve a minimum of 20 years before any possibility of release. He was in his early 60s at sentencing, meaning that, functionally, this was very likely a life sentence in every way that mattered. Even after the guilty plea, one question was never really answered to the Bastian family's satisfaction: why? Washburn never offered investigators, or the court, any real explanation for what had driven him to kill a 13-year-old girl he had no prior relationship with. Patty Bastian said as much after the hearing, that even with a confession, even with a sentence, the fundamental question of why her daughter had been chosen, why this had happened at all, remained exactly as unanswered as it had been in 1986. Part 9. Gary Hartman's trial. Gary Hartman's case took considerably longer to reach a resolution, delayed in part by the COVID-19 pandemic, which pushed court proceedings across the country back by months and sometimes years. He initially pleaded not guilty, and for a period maintained that position even as the DNA evidence against him mounted. According to his own defense team, something shifted while he was in custody awaiting trial. His attorney would later describe it in striking terms, that Hartman appeared to have spent years genuinely convincing himself he hadn't committed the crime, only to wake up at some point in county jail with the dawning, horrifying realization that he actually had. Hartman reportedly told a co-worker before his arrest that he thought police might be onto something he'd done 30 years ago, a comment that, in hindsight, reads as a man watching the walls close in and half expecting it. Hartman ultimately requested a bench trial, meaning the case would be decided by a judge alone, without a jury. It began on the 22nd of March, 2022. By multiple accounts from the courtroom, prosecutors and the defense had, by that point, agreed on enough of the underlying facts that the trial itself was brief. One attorney close to the case remarked that Hartman had, in practice, done almost everything short of formally pleading guilty. After less than 2 hours of proceedings, Judge Stanley Rumbaugh delivered his verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree rape. Hartman, then 70 years old, and using a walker to move through the courtroom, broke down as the verdict was read and again during sentencing. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed, according to reporters present. "God knows I'm so sorry. That doesn't help. I'm just sorry." Michella's mother, Barbara Leonard, addressed the court before sentencing. "I say, lock him up and throw away the key," she told the judge. "And now he will pay the price. However, it will not bring her back, but justice will have been served." Michella's aunt, Linda McGuire, submitted a written statement of her own, that Michella's murder had been the single most devastating event in the family's history, and that it had left, in her words, a hole in their lives no one would ever be able to fill. Judge Rumbaugh sentenced Hartman to 26 years and 6 months in prison, telling him plainly that, given his age, he would very likely die in custody. Like Washburn, Hartman never provided a clear motive, no explanation for why he had targeted a 12-year-old girl playing in a park 2 miles from his own home in 1986, and none for the 3 decades of silence that followed. Part 10. What made IT possible? It's worth pausing before closing this case out to properly credit exactly how these 2 murders were finally solved, because it represents one of the more genuinely significant turning points in modern American cold case investigation. And it happened almost entirely because one detective refused to let 2 files gather dust. Investigative genetic genealogy, the technique of uploading crime scene DNA to public genealogy databases, building out family trees from any partial matches, and narrowing a suspect pool down from millions of possibilities to a small handful of named individuals, was still a genuinely novel tool in criminal investigation when Wade began applying it to these cases. It had, by that point, become famous for helping identify the so-called Golden State Killer earlier, the same year Hartman was arrested, and Tacoma's Cold Case Unit was among the earliest departments in the country to use the same approach on cases of their own. The Washington State Legislature would go on to formally recognize the significance of the Welch and Bastian investigations. New DNA collection legislation passed in the years following these arrests was named, in part, after the 2 girls, a rare, tangible acknowledgement that the technology used to finally catch their killers had also permanently changed what was investigatively possible for every other unsolved case sitting in an evidence locker somewhere. Lindsay Wade, who'd grown up frightened by these murders as a child and spent 9 years of her career trying to solve them as an adult, retired from the Tacoma Police Department in April 2018. Just weeks before Robert Washburn's arrest, finally closed the case she'd spent the better part of a decade chasing. She has since spoken publicly, including in a piece for Police One, about the broader lesson she took from both investigations, that DNA evidence sitting untested in an evidence room is not, on its own, justice. It only becomes justice when someone keeps pushing, year after year, until the technology and the persistence finally meet in the same place at the same time. There's a particular kind of grief embedded in this case that's different from most true crime stories. Not because of anything about how these 2 men were finally caught, which is, if anything, one of the more genuinely hopeful chapters in modern cold casework. It's the 32 years in between that sit heaviest. Barbara Leonard raised her 2 younger daughters into adulthood without ever knowing who had taken Michella from her, or why. Patty and Teresa Bastian marked 32 birthdays, 32 anniversaries of a day that should have ended with a 13-year-old riding her bike home for dinner without a single answer to hold onto. An entire city lived for 3 decades with the belief that one man was responsible for both losses, a belief that turned out to be wrong, and that, in its own way, meant the truth, when it finally arrived, was even harder to absorb. Not 1 predator loose in Tacoma's parks that year, but 2, acting independently, each getting away with an unthinkable crime for over 30 years simply because the science required to catch them hadn't been invented yet. Michella Welch was 12 years old. She rode her bike home to get lunch for her sisters and never made it back. Jennifer Bastian was 13. She left a note telling her father she'd be home by 6:30, and she meant it. Neither girl got to grow up. But because one detective grew up carrying their story with her and refused to let it stay unfinished, Both of their killers eventually had to answer for what they did, 32 years too late for either family to call it justice exactly, but not too late for it to matter. This has been the case of Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian. Thank you for listening.